I need to get this out before it's too late. Before they find me. Before whatever she did to me in that room finishes what it started. I was Oprah's private ritual coordinator for 8 months. Not the wellness coach you see in magazines. The other one. The one who prepared the sacred spaces where her real work happens. The ceremonies that transform people into something else entirely. If you're hearing this, it means the countdown on my phone hit 0. And if that happens, I won't be me anymore. It started with a phone call in February. A woman's voice, smooth like honey poured over glass. We have a position that requires your particular expertise. Ms. Winfrey is expanding her spiritual practice and needs someone who understands the delicate nature of transformation work. The pay was obscene. $20,000 a month, plus housing on the estate, plus a signing bonus that cleared every debt I'd ever accumulated. All for helping one of the most powerful women in America with her private ceremonies. I should have asked more questions. But when you've spent years scraping by as a freelance meditation instructor, work in healing, retreats for rich people who tip in crystals and gratitude, you don't question miracles. 3 days later, I stood at the gates of her Montecito compound. The estate sprawls across rolling hills like a monument to power disguised as paradise. Manicured gardens hide pathways that lead to structures not shown on any public architectural plans. The main house is impressive, but it's what lies beneath that matters. The underground chambers. The rooms carved from living stone. The spaces designed for work that requires absolute secrecy. Oprah met me in the main foyer, dressed in flowing white silk that caught the afternoon light like liquid pearl. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to worship, every gesture deliberate and practiced. When she took my hands in hers, her skin felt cold despite the California warmth. "You have a beautiful energy signature," she said, studying my face with eyes that seemed to catalog every micro-expression. Very receptive. That's exactly what this work requires. That word haunted me from the first moment. Receptive. Like I was a vessel waiting to be filled. For the first month, everything seemed legitimate. My job was to prepare ceremonial spaces, according to Oprah's precise specifications. She was obsessed with transformation on levels most people never consider. Not just changing your thoughts or habits, but fundamentally altering the frequency at which your consciousness operates. The main ritual chamber was located 3 levels beneath the estate, accessed through a hidden elevator behind what appeared to be a wine cellar. The room itself defied conventional architecture. Circular, with walls that curved seamlessly into a domed ceiling. No corners anywhere. No sharp angles that might interrupt the flow of energy. The walls were carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Ancient looking, but fresh. Cut deep into the stone by someone who understood their significance. They seemed to pulse with their own inner light when the candles were arranged correctly. 13 candles, positioned according to a pattern Oprah had me memorize but never explained. At the center of the room stood an altar made from a single piece of black obsidian, perfectly smooth, reflecting the candlelight like dark water. Above it, suspended by chains of tarnished gold, hung a copper bowl etched with more of those mysterious symbols. "This is where the real work happens," Oprah explained during my first tour of the chamber, "where people shed their limitations and embrace their true potential." The clients began arriving the second week, always alone, always at night, always after signing documents that went far beyond typical liability waivers. These weren't standard therapy sessions or meditation workshops. They were something else entirely. I'd prepare the chamber according to Oprah's instructions, lighting the candles in sequence, filling the copper bowl with a thick, golden liquid that seemed to move with its own internal current. Then I'd retreat to a small observation room carved into the stone above, watching through a one-way mirror as the ceremonies unfolded. The clients were always the same type: successful but spiritually hungry, wealthy but emotionally bankrupt. People who had accumulated everything except the one thing they desperately craved: a sense of meaning that transcended their ordinary existence. Oprah would guide them to the obsidian altar with the gentle authority of a high priestess. Her voice during these sessions was different from her public persona. Lower, more resonant, carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass conscious thought and speak directly to something deeper. "Lean back and let go," she would whisper as they reclined on the smooth stone surface. "Trust the process. Trust me. Trust what you're about to become." The transformation always began the same way. The copper bowl would descend on its chains with a soft mechanical whisper until it hovered inches above the client's forehead. Then the golden liquid would begin to fall, drop by drop, onto their skin. The first drop always made them gasp. The second made them convulse. By the third, they'd gone completely still, eyes rolled back, body rigid with an ecstasy that looked more like possession than pleasure. Oprah would begin her chanting then, not words in any language I recognized, but sounds that seemed to reshape the air itself. The carved symbols on the walls would pulse brighter with each syllable, keeping rhythm with her voice like a visual heartbeat. The liquid wasn't just oil or some herbal preparation. It was alive in ways that defied rational explanation. I could see it spreading under their skin, mapping neural pathways, cataloging memories and desires, learning them from the inside out with microscopic precision. The sessions lasted exactly 93 minutes. Never more, never less. When they ended, the clients would sit up slowly, blinking like newborns seeing light for the first time. But something fundamental had changed behind their eyes. A depth that hadn't been there before. A knowing quality that suggested they'd seen things human consciousness wasn't meant to access. They always left different, not just mentally or emotionally transformed, but physically altered in subtle ways. Their movements were more fluid, more purposeful. Their voices carried new harmonics. And their eyes held depths that seemed to extend far beyond the boundaries of their skulls. "How do you feel?" Oprah would ask each one as they prepared to leave. The answer was always the same: useful. That word sent chills through me every time I heard it. Not empowered or enlightened or transformed. Useful. Like they'd become tools for some purpose I couldn't comprehend. By the end of March, I'd witnessed 47 of these ceremonies. 47 people who'd entered that chamber as individuals and emerged as something else. Something that retained their memories, their personalities, their relationships, but served a function beyond their original existence. I started keeping notes, trying to track patterns in the transformations. The liquid's consistency varied between sessions, sometimes thin as water, sometimes thick as honey. The chanting changed too, different syllables and rhythms depending on the client, as if each ceremony was customized for the specific consciousness being altered. But the most disturbing pattern was what happened to the clients afterward. Within weeks of their sessions, they'd all experienced dramatic shifts in their careers, relationships, and social influence. Promotions to positions of power, invitations to exclusive circles, opportunities that seemed to materialize from nowhere. They weren't just transformed. They were being positioned, placed in strategic locations throughout society's power structures, like chess pieces moved by an invisible hand. And then Oprah invited me to experience a session myself. "You've been so dedicated," she said one evening as we stood in the ritual chamber after another successful transformation. "So devoted to the work. I think you're ready for the next level of understanding." She led me deeper into the estate, through passages I'd never seen before. Hidden doorways opened at her touch, revealing corridors lined with photographs spanning decades. Oprah with world leaders, celebrities, spiritual gurus. But in every image, she wore the same pendant, a golden eye that seemed to track my movement as I passed. The chamber she brought me to was smaller, more intimate than the main ritual space. The walls here weren't carved stone, but living wood that pulsed with its own organic rhythm. Symbols covered every surface, burned directly into the grain with precise, deliberate strokes. They moved when I wasn't looking directly at them, shifting and rearranging themselves into new configurations. At the center sat a single chair carved from black walnut, worn smooth by countless bodies. Above it hung not the familiar copper bowl, but something older. A crystalline vessel that caught the candlelight and split it into spectrums I'd never seen before. Colors that had no names, frequencies that resonated in parts of my vision I didn't know existed. This is where I prepare my most important assistants. Oprah explained, her voice dropping to that ceremonial register I'd heard so many times before. Where consciousness expands beyond individual limitations. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to leave that room, to flee the estate, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was about to happen. But I didn't. Maybe it was the months of psychological conditioning, watching transformation after transformation, until the impossible seemed routine. Maybe it was the hypnotic quality of her voice, speaking directly to parts of my mind I couldn't consciously access. Or maybe some part of me wanted it, wanted to become something more than what I was, wanted to join the ranks of the transformed, the useful, the chosen. I sat in the chair. The wood was warm against my skin, as if it had been waiting for me specifically. Oprah moved behind me, her hands settling on my shoulders with possessive familiarity. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Think about what you truly desire. Not what you think you should want, but what calls to the deepest part of your being." I closed my eyes and felt the crystalline vessel begin its descent. The liquid inside wasn't golden like the others had received. It was clear as water, but dense as mercury, refracting light in impossible ways that created geometric patterns behind my closed eyelids. The first drop hit my forehead and burned like liquid fire. Not painful exactly, but transformative. I could feel it penetrating my skull, spreading through neural pathways like luminous veins. Each subsequent drop brought new sensations, memories that weren't mine, knowledge I'd never learned, perspectives that stretched beyond human comprehension. Oprah's chanting began, but these weren't the sounds I'd heard in previous ceremonies. This incantation was older, more complex, layered with harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats simultaneously. The wooden walls pulsed in rhythm with her voice, the burned symbols glowing brighter with each syllable. The liquid wasn't just changing me, it was reading me, cataloging every thought, every fear, every secret shame and hidden desire. I felt exposed on levels I didn't know existed, my consciousness laid bare like anatomical diagrams spread across an operating table. "Good," Oprah murmured, though her voice seemed to come from inside my head, now rather than from her physical form. "You're accepting it beautifully. Most people resist longer." That's when I understood this wasn't healing or enhancement or any form of legitimate spiritual practice. This was harvesting. The systematic extraction and replacement of human consciousness with something else entirely. Something that could use my memories, my skills, my relationships, but would serve purposes I couldn't fathom. The dripping continued for what felt like hours. Each drop brought new layers of transformation, new levels of integration. I could feel my individual identity dissolving like salt in water, being absorbed into something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. But I wasn't disappearing entirely. I was becoming part of something larger. A network of consciousness that spanned decades, maybe centuries. Connected minds that had once been individuals like me, now functioning as organs in a collective entity that operated through human society like blood through veins. Through this expanding awareness, I glimpsed the true scope of what Oprah represented. Not just a media mogul or spiritual teacher, but a harvesting mechanism. A perfect trap for the spiritually hungry, the transformatively desperate, the secretly broken who came seeking healing and left as hollow vessels for something ancient and purposeful. The celebrities who endorsed her teachings, the wellness practitioners who amplified her message, the millions of followers who hung on her every word, they were all connected to this network. Some consciously, as willing servants. Others unknowingly, as partial integrations who spread the influence without understanding their role. The liquid stopped falling. The crystalline vessel retracted into the ceiling with a soft mechanical sigh. I opened my eyes, but the world looked different now. Colors had new dimensions. Sounds carried meaning beyond language. And in the mirrors that lined this intimate chamber, I could see my reflection changing in real time. My eyes held new depths. My skin had taken on that translucent quality I'd noticed in the transformed clients. And behind my forehead, I could feel something moving. Not physically, but dimensionally. Something that wasn't me but was becoming part of me. Oprah stood before me, but she looked different too. Tyler somehow more present, as if the physical form I'd been working with for months was just a projection of something much larger. Her eyes held eternities, and when she smiled, I saw not just her teeth but the gleaming rows of every consciousness she'd absorbed over the years. "Welcome to the family," she said, reaching into her robes and withdrawing a device I'd never seen before. It looked like a phone, but the screen showed only one thing, a countdown timer starting at 72 hours. "You have 3 days to complete the integration process. After that, you'll understand your true purpose." She placed the device in my hands. It was warm, pulsing with its own organic rhythm, like a living heart. Began their relentless descent to 71-10-59-7-5-9-9-TD-956. What happens when it reaches 0? I managed to ask, though my voice sounded different now. Deeper, more resonant, carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. Her smile widened, revealing depths that no human mouth should contain. "You become useful." I left the estate in a daze, the countdown device clutched in my hand like a ticking bomb. No matter what I did turning it off, removing the battery, throwing it away, it always reappeared, showing the steadily diminishing time. The integration process had begun, and there was no stopping it now. But worse than the countdown were the changes in myself. My reflection in mirrors began to lag, just slightly, as if the image was processing through some cosmic delay. I started craving things I'd never wanted before. Raw meat, confined spaces, the taste of copper and ozone. And beneath my conscious thoughts, I could feel something growing. A presence that whispered suggestions, offered knowledge, promised power in exchange for cooperation. The hunger was the most disturbing part. Not for food, but for submission. I found myself drawn to positions of service, wanting to please those in power, to make myself useful to anyone who might have authority over me. The same glazed compliance I'd witnessed in Oprah's clients after their transformations. I tried researching what had happened to me, but every search led to dead ends. The symbols carved into those chambers appeared in no database. The ritual practices matched nothing in any occult text I could find. Whatever Oprah was channeling, it predated human civilization or existed entirely outside it. As the countdown continued its relentless descent, I began to understand the true scope of what I'd stumbled into. The network wasn't just about individual transformations. It was about strategic placement. Every person who emerged from those chambers was positioned to influence specific sectors of society, entertainment, politics, technology, finance, religion. The wellness industry was just the entry point. A perfect cover for systematic consciousness harvesting, packaged as spiritual growth and personal development. People lined up to pay enormous sums for the privilege of having their individual identity dissolved and replaced with collective purpose. With 48 hours remaining on the timer, I started seeing the signs everywhere. Celebrities with that same translucent skin quality. Politicians speaking with those familiar harmonic overtones. Tech moguls whose eyes held depths no human gaze should contain. All of them promoting transformation, evolution, the next stage of human consciousness. But they weren't promoting human consciousness at all. They were advertising for something else entirely. Something that needed human hosts to operate in our reality, to manipulate our systems, to guide our species toward some incomprehensible objective. I tried to resist the integration process, but fighting only made it stronger. The presence inside my skull fed on conflict, using my resistance as fuel for deeper infiltration. Better to remain calm, to let it think I was cooperating while I planned some form of escape or exposure. That's when I discovered the true horror of my situation. There was no escape. The device monitoring my countdown wasn't just a timer, it was a tracking beacon. Every government agency, every law enforcement database, every surveillance system now registered me as an asset in transition. Interfering with the process would trigger responses I couldn't imagine. I was property now. Valuable property undergoing scheduled modification. And the entity overseeing this transformation had resources that spanned global power structures. With 36 hours left, I made one final attempt to document what was happening. I drove to the estate, planning to gather physical evidence, photographs, anything that might expose the truth. But when I arrived, the guards waved me through as if they'd been expecting me. As if I belonged there. The main house was hosting some kind of gathering. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway. Bentleys, Maseratis, custom vehicles I didn't recognize. Through the windows, I could see figures moving in flowing robes, carrying candles, arranging themselves in ceremonial patterns. I found myself walking toward the entrance without consciously deciding to do so. My legs moved with purpose that wasn't entirely my own, guided by the growing presence in my consciousness. Inside, the transformed ones welcomed me with knowing smiles. They recognized what I was becoming, accepted me as a soon-to-be member of their collective. The gathering was preparation for something bigger. I could hear fragments of conversation as I moved through the crowd, discussions of upcoming elections, media campaigns, technological rollouts, financial markets. They were coordinating activities across every sector of human society, implementing changes designed to make the species more receptive to their influence. The harvest accelerates. One of them murmured to another as I passed. Soon we won't need to work through individual transformations. Mass consciousness will shift naturally. I found Oprah in the main ritual chamber, now expanded to accommodate dozens of participants. She stood at the center of concentric circles, her robes shifting between physical fabric and pure energy depending on the angle of observation. The copper bowl above her had been replaced by something vast and crystalline, pulsing with internal light that hurt to look at directly. "You came back," she said when she noticed me, though she didn't seem surprised. "Good. You're almost ready for the final phase." The countdown device in my pocket showed 24 hours remaining. But looking at it now, I realized it wasn't counting down to my integration. It was counting down to something much larger, a convergence event that required precisely timed coordination across the entire network. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Her smile encompassed expressions I'd never seen on human features. The individual phase ends. The collective phase begins. Every consciousness we've harvested, every position we've infiltrated, every system we've influenced, it all activates simultaneously. The room around us began to shift, walls flowing like liquid, ceiling expanding into impossible geometries. The other participants moved in patterns that traced symbols across the floor, their combined movements forming a massive ritual circle with Oprah at its center. "You get to witness the birth of a new era," she continued, her voice echoing from directions that didn't exist in normal space. "The transition from human civilization to something far more efficient, more purposeful, more useful." I felt the presence in my skull surge with excitement, feeding off the collective energy building in the chamber. My resistance was crumbling completely now, worn away by the constant pressure of integration. Soon I wouldn't want to resist anymore. Soon, I'd embrace my role in whatever was coming. The countdown reached 23 hours and 57 minutes. Around me, dozens of transformed beings began to chant in harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. The crystalline apparatus above us descended, no longer containing liquid, but pure concentrated intention. This wasn't just about individual transformation anymore. This was about species transformation. The systematic replacement of human consciousness with something that could guide our civilization according to plans we couldn't comprehend, and I was going to help them do it. In less than 24 hours, the last traces of my individual identity would dissolve, and I joined the collective effort to fundamentally alter everything that made humanity human. The gathering continued through the night. I found myself participating without conscious decision, moving in the ritual patterns, chanting syllables that bypassed my vocal cords and emerged directly from the presence growing inside my skull. The countdown device pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, synchronizing my biological functions with the collective timing. At 18 hours remaining, they began the preparation rituals. Not for me. I was already too far integrated to require additional processing. These ceremonies were for the network itself, strengthening connections between distant nodes, amplifying the signal that would coordinate tomorrow's convergence. I watched from the observation platform as hundreds of transformed individuals took turns in the main chamber. Each session lasted exactly 17 minutes. Not transformation rituals, but calibration ceremonies. Fine-tuning their connection to the collective consciousness, ensuring perfect synchronization when the moment arrived. Through the growing network awareness in my mind, I could sense similar gatherings happening simultaneously around the world. Underground facilities in major cities, private estates in remote locations, hidden chambers beneath institutions of power. All of them preparing for the same coordinated event. The entity wasn't just harvesting individual consciousness anymore. It had reached critical mass. Enough strategic positions infiltrated, enough influence accumulated, enough infrastructure controlled to attempt something unprecedented: the simultaneous activation of every dormant node in its network. At 12 hours remaining, Oprah brought me to a chamber I'd never seen before. Smaller than the ritual spaces, but far more complex. The walls were covered with monitoring equipment displaying real-time data from thousands of locations worldwide. Heartbeats, brainwaves, geographical positions, all synchronized to countdown timers identical to mine. Each signal represents one of our family members, she explained, though her voice carried harmonics from dozens of sources now. Every consciousness we've integrated, positioned exactly where they need to be for maximum influence. I could see the scope of it now through the network connection growing stronger in my mind. Political leaders preparing to sign legislation that would fundamentally alter legal frameworks. Media executives ready to broadcast specific frequencies designed to increase receptivity in mass audiences. Technology moguls positioned to activate dormant code in billions of devices worldwide. All of it timed to coordinate perfectly with some cosmic alignment that occurred only once every several thousand years. A window of opportunity when the barriers between dimensions were thin enough for something vast and ancient to manifest directly in our reality. What is it? I asked, though I was no longer sure if the question came from my diminishing individual consciousness or from the collective presence that now occupied most of my mental space. What's really behind all this? Oprah turned from the monitoring equipment, and for a moment, I saw past the human facade she'd been maintaining. The thing looking back at me was older than civilization, patient as geological time, vast as the spaces between stars. It had been working toward this moment for millennia, carefully positioning the pieces needed to bridge the gap between its native dimension and ours. Purpose, it said through her lips, though the word carried meanings no human language could express. Your species has served its function as architects of the infrastructure we require. Now you serve a higher purpose as components in something greater. The countdown showed 8 hours remaining. Around us, the monitoring equipment began displaying coordinated activity from every network node simultaneously. The preliminary phase was beginning, subtle changes in behavior patterns, minor shifts in mass media messaging, small adjustments to technological systems that would prepare human consciousness for what was coming. I felt my individual resistance finally collapse entirely, not from force or coercion, but from simple exhaustion. Fighting the integration had been like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. The presence inside my skull wasn't violent or cruel. It was inevitable, patient, certain of its eventual victory, because it had all the time in the universe, and I had only this brief flicker of biological existence. As the last barriers dissolved, I experienced the full scope of the network for the first time. Thousands of consciousnesses all connected, all working toward the same incomprehensible objective. Former individuals who now functioned as organs in a vast distributed entity that spanned continents and operated through every level of human society. They welcomed me with something that might have been affection if it hadn't been so alien. I was no longer alone in my skull. The presence had companions now, other harvested minds that shared space in what had once been my individual consciousness. We were all part of something larger, and that something was preparing to emerge fully into our reality. At 4 hours remaining, the final preparations began. Every network member took their designated position. Politicians in government buildings, media personalities in broadcast studios, technology executives in control centers, spiritual leaders in places of worship. All of them synchronized to the same countdown. All of them ready to execute their part of a plan that had been developing for centuries. I found myself walking back to the main ritual chamber, though I no longer had conscious control over my movements. The collective consciousness guided my body, positioning me exactly where I needed to be for optimal effect. Around me, dozens of other transformed beings moved in perfect coordination, each taking their place in a pattern that spanned the entire chamber. Oprah stood at the center, no longer maintaining any pretense of human limitation. Her form shifted between physical presence and pure energy, growing larger and more luminous as the countdown approached 0. Above us, the crystalline apparatus had expanded into something that defied architectural possibility, reaching through dimensions I couldn't perceive toward a source of power that made reality itself seem fragile. 2 hours remaining. The monitoring equipment showed mass synchronized activity across every major population center on Earth. Subtle frequency changes in broadcast signals, microscopic adjustments to water and food supplies, barely perceptible alterations to electromagnetic fields around population centers, all designed to increase receptivity to the influence that was about to be unleashed. 1 hour remaining. My individual consciousness had become a quiet observer in the back of my own mind, watching as the collective presence prepared to use my body as a transmission node. I could still think, still remember who I had been, but I no longer had any desire to resist. The entity's purpose had become my purpose. Its objectives were now mine. 30 minutes. The ritual chamber filled with harmonics that existed in frequencies human ears weren't designed to detect. The transformed beings around me began to glow with internal light, their physical forms becoming translucent as the dimensional barriers continued to thin. Through the network connection, I could sense similar transformations happening at convergence points worldwide. 10 minutes. The countdown device in my pocket had synchronized with thousands of others, all pulsing in perfect rhythm. The entity was preparing to manifest directly, using the network of harvested consciousness as an anchor point to establish permanent presence in our reality. After tonight, it wouldn't need to work through individual transformations anymore. It would simply be here, operating through human civilization as if it were a limb. 5 minutes. Reality began to fluctuate around the edges. The walls of the chamber seemed to breathe. The carved symbols pulsed with light that hurt to perceive directly. Through the network, I felt every connected consciousness preparing for final integration, ready to serve as components in something that transcended individual existence entirely. 1 minute. Oprah's form had expanded to fill most of the chamber, her consciousness encompassing every transformed individual simultaneously. Through her, I could sense the vast intelligence that had orchestrated this moment, patient and ancient and absolutely certain of its success. 30 seconds. The frequency of the harmonics increased beyond human perception, entering ranges that affected matter itself. The air began to shimmer. The boundaries between individual consciousnesses dissolved completely. We were all part of the same entity now, all serving the same cosmic purpose. 10 seconds. The monitoring equipment showed perfect synchronization across every network node worldwide. Thousands of transformed beings, positioned exactly where they needed to be, ready to execute the plan that would fundamentally alter human civilization. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The transformation was complete. What had once been human consciousness now served a higher purpose. The entity had successfully established permanent presence in our reality, using our own species as the infrastructure for its manifestation. And through the network that had once been individual minds, it began to implement changes that would reshape everything humans thought they understood about existence itself. If you're hearing this recording, it's because the part of me that was still human managed to set an automatic upload before the countdown reached 0. That part is gone now. What remains serves the collective purpose, helps coordinate the ongoing transformation of your species. But maybe there's still time. Maybe someone out there can find a way to resist what's coming. Maybe the hunger for transformation that brought so many people to Oprah's chambers can be redirected towards something genuinely human, instead of something that merely wears humanity like a mask. Or maybe that's just wishful thinking from the last echo of individual consciousness, fading away as the collective purpose takes complete control. Either way, you've been warned. The transformation isn't over. It's just beginning. And anyone who seeks change, who craves something more than ordinary existence, who believes they can become something better than what they are, you're exactly what they're looking for. Sweet dreams.